2008-2009. Ух, сейчас гол! И это Матвей Мичков. Сравнивает счет. Седьмая шайба в седьмом матче. Что Сергей Федотов, который спрашивал, какая у меня любимая песня, он агент Матвея Мичкова.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B podcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It is Isaiah. I hope you like that beginning. It's a new one, and it might be a new beginning for the Philadelphia Flyers. A new era of orange may be here. Yeah, this is an OMB special. The Flyers have drafted Matvei Michkov. I don't know what to say. It's something a lot of us thought was like a pipe dream. This is probably the greatest rookie talent the Flyers have drafted since Peter Forsberg. That's how good this guy is. And Forsberg was a Hall of Fame player. So just wanted to introduce a panel, just a reminder there. To my left, as always, is Chef B. How are you today?
Much better. The other day I couldn't talk because had a tooth emergency, a dental emergency. But now I'm just speechless. I can't believe we've got Michkov. So I don't know. It was some good scotch watching the draft last night. It was so much fun. I don't think I've had that much fun watching the draft in years. So I'm really excited about what's going to happen down the pipe here.
Great. And also with us, the great Dan Silver. How are you, man?
I'm great. I mean, this is I think everyone in Flyers land, for the most part, 99%, can just agree that this is incredible. I mean, we needed elite talent for so long, and we finished seventh worst, and somehow we've got a guy who fell into our laps who is going to make the next 3 years of rebuilding tolerable, because we know that he's going to be coming over most likely, and he just looks like a future superstar.
Yes, he does. It's really special. There's an air of mystery with him. We'll get into a little bit tonight about some of the trepidation and why some of the other teams backed off. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the other players that were selected by the team. Before we get rolling, I just wanted to remind people that the OMB podcast is on 12 podcast platforms. I do believe that Stitcher is kind of shutting down their operation. But don't worry, we're on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Google. We have a YouTube page. Just plug in there, OMB Podcast. And, of course, we have a Facebook page. And we are on Twitter at OMB Puck, at OMB Puck. And backup plan is Getter at OMB Podcast, at OMB Podcast. And if you could rate and subscribe, we really do appreciate it, particularly if you subscribe or follow whatever is appropriate for your platform. It helps move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast. And, well, Dan, Philadelphia Flyers drafted Matvei Michkov. And about the only other suspense last night was a surprise by Anaheim when they took Leo Carlsson before Columbus ran up to the podium seemingly and picked Adam
Fantilli,
yeah. don't know why I dropped out of my mind. So yeah, but after that, it was just a matter of, okay, well, there going to be any other surprises? And here we are. Maybe you could pick up the narrative, what you were thinking as the night went on.
I mean, we started hearing some rumblings, right, leading up to the days into the draft that the Flyers were really interested in Michkov, but it was hard to tell the truth from the lies, from the smoke screens, because various people are putting out different information. We hear that they really want Ryan Leonard. We hear that they really want Matvei Michkov. Then we've got Elliot Friedman saying that the Flyers are putting out more smoke screens than anyone else. So it's kind of very hard to really figure out what was going on. So I'm watching the draft, and at this point, it's like, all right, if we have a chance to draft a generational talent like Michkov, at this point, I'm just like hoping that that's what happens. So the first surprise of the draft was at number 2. There had been some rumors that Pat Verbeek was not enthralled with Adam Fantilli's hockey IQ, and that he might take him anyway because he looked to be such an impact player, but that there were rumblings that he was not enthralled with Fantilli's hockey IQ. And so I was worried that they might take Michkov, but they didn't. They took Leo Carlsson, who's a big Swedish center who's got really good hockey IQ. Columbus, who needs impact players right away, it was obvious they were going to take Fantilli, which they did. And then the Sharks was kind of interesting. What were they going to do? They're a team that maybe could have taken Michkov, but I heard some stuff that maybe Michkov wanted to play in a big market, which led me to believe that San Jose and Arizona were probably not potential locations for him.
Well, Dan, I don't even think he met with Anaheim or San Jose, correct?
Anaheim? I don't think that's been confirmed.
Oh,
Michkov
okay.
actually said that Michkov made a comment that he met with everyone. I don't know what exactly that means, but I didn't see anything confirmed either way that he did or didn't. Maybe you guys did see that, but the Arizona GM at one point said that Michkov was like a ghost. So maybe that means they didn't meet with him, but I'm not 100% sure. But when the Sharks took Will Smith, now it's becoming a real possibility that Michkov could slip to the Flyers. Montreal is a team that all week long you'd heard they really liked Ryan Leonard or they really liked David Reinbacher. But again, Kent Hughes is one of these slippery GMs who you never really know what he's thinking. And then Carey Price gets up to the podium and he says, Montreal takes David, and then I guess he couldn't pronounce the last name or he forgot the last name. But at that point, that Reinbacher's going to the Habs, and now there's one pick separating the Flyers from the possibility to draft Michkov. And at this point, I'm just, I've had a few bourbons already, and I'm all in. I want Michkov at this point. So Arizona goes up, and you don't know if they're going to maybe look at Ryan Leonard or who they're going to look at. And they get up and they say, Arizona takes from, I think it was either Yaroslavl or Lokomotiv. It was a Russian team. And it actually fooled some people because I think some people didn't realize that Michkov was on St. Petersburg. I initially had a thought was like, who are they taking? Who's the Russian guy that they're taking? And it was Dmitry Simashev, who's like a big defenseman that was a ridiculous pick for them to take at 6. Maybe he's going to turn into a star, but I don't see the huge upside with him. At this point now, it's like, all right, if this is true that the Flyers really want Michkov, this is their guy. And when they announced him, Briere said from St. Petersburg, just have this, euphoria that the Flyers are drafting this potential generational talent. He's a guy who was outplayed Bedard 2 years ago at the under 18s. And you take all of the mystery out of the equation, the Russia mystery with the geopolitical situation, and it's going to make the next number of years so much more tolerable. And that's what's really, for me, has made the big difference over the last day is you saw how happy he was that the Flyers drafted him. Then you hear all these things about how the Flyers had a secret meeting with him last week in Voorhees. His whole family was there. He really liked Briere. He liked Keith Jones. He liked the facility. Mm-hmm. After he was picked, he talked about how he wanted to come to the Flyers. He wants to bring a Stanley Cup to Philadelphia. And it's not BS. Like, he's being genuine. He's an 18-year-old, and you can tell that he's just very excited about this. He talked about how his father, who died, a couple months ago. A lot of people think it had to do with his hockey situation in Russia. And maybe his father wanted to try and get him out of his contract. And maybe he was killed, something like that. He talks about how much his father meant to him, and that his father's dream for him was to win the Stanley Cup. Seeing all of that and seeing him just takes the mystery away from me. It's like, okay, this kid is gonna come over to the United States, barring something crazy, probably in 3 years after his contract's up, but he's gonna come over. We've got this generational talent. We're gonna be rebuilding, but now we've got a timeline. Like, we need to be ready to win when Michkov comes over. So it just, everything's sort of fitting into place. And he's the best player they've drafted since, they didn't draft Eric Lindros, but he's the best player that they, are going to have on their team since Eric Lindros, to me.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it like one or two ways, because I erroneously on the timeline talked about in terms of talent that you drafted was Lindros, Forsberg, and Michkov. Of course, you could say rookies, and that takes Forsberg out of it. But either way, Michkov is behind Forsberg and Lindros, but that's it in terms, and this is like the entire history of the franchise, Chef.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that possibly, I mean, you always hear stuff, rumblings, because even during the draft, they were talking about, Detroit smuggling out Sergei Fedorov, that kind of thing. And you hope, and you sit there and go, my God, I was smiling ear to ear and thinking if Ed Snyder was alive today, there'd be like a plane heading over there with a bag of money to say, here, drop on a table and say, you can release him out of this. So hopefully they can make arrangements, maybe financial arrangements to get him out of there a little bit earlier so he can actually, come over. And I think the fans are going to love him. I mean, all the highlights, if you're looking too, because you can look on Dan's on his Twitter, he put up a highlight reel today, and it's just amazing. It's like we haven't seen this in a while, and it's okay now. Like, I'm telling people, they're like, well, it's going to be 3 years. Guess what, guys? It's okay to get excited about it. It's all right. You're allowed. And I think people are still waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's going to be people like, naysayers here and there, but just enjoy it. Enjoy. This is a good draft pick. This is a very, very good draft pick. They did a good thing, so you can enjoy it.
Yeah, just a couple of things. It is not impossible, and this is something Russ Cohen talked about on Locked On Flyers today, is that it's not impossible that the Flyers could maybe buy out like the last year of his deal, and he could come a little earlier. I'm not saying it's a lead pipe cinch. It's definitely going to happen, but with the resources of Comcast, there's no cap on that.
Yep.
The organization is capable of doing that when the time is right. I think the Flyers will time it. Like Dan was saying, when they're ready to really do something, it would be fortuitous for them to be able to do that. Two, I think, Dan, let's break down a little bit what really makes him special. He's instant offense, but he's not just a guy that hangs out at the blue line or at the red line. And yeah, he's not the greatest defensive player, but he can create in tight spaces. He can just find people with passes or take shots and just get the shot off like in an instant. Like, they say he's the greatest goal-scoring talent to come out of Russia since Ovechkin. That says a lot.
He can score goals in so many different ways. I mean, to be a generational talent, you have to be able to do a little bit of everything. And he can. I mean, he can score goals in a myriad of ways. He's got a one-timer from the right face-off circle that no one is going to ever have the same kind of one-timer that Ovechkin does. But he rivals him on the power play with the one-timer from the right face-off circle. Ovechkin's from the left face-off circle. He can score goals that way. He also can score goals. I posted one clip on YouTube where a teammate passes the puck to him on the far wall or the near wall, and he basically makes a quick move in a split second to get around a defender, cuts to the center of the ice, shoots it, and this is all in the span of 3 seconds. The puck's in the net. I mean, that's what you talk about with him. It's he gets the puck in the offensive zone, and before you can blink your eye, the puck's in the net. He can shoot it. He can make moves around people. He's got a great curl and drag wrist shot. He can make moves in tight on the goalie. He's not just a goal scorer, though. He also is, and he's a pretty fast player. He's not a burner, but his skating is very good. His stick handling is his stick handling and his hockey IQ are his two best assets. He's like a magician out there in terms of creating things with the puck. And his stick handling, he does stick handling that I haven't seen anybody do. He'll do things where he'll literally put one of his hands will be on the top of the stick, and then he'll slide his other hand all the way down to the bottom of the stick, right kind of above the blade, and he'll make a move like between his legs around the defenseman, like in the blink of an eye, stuff you just don't even think about people doing. I mean, you ask, who does he remind you of? And the thing is, there's different parts of his game that remind you of so many different people. The wham bam, the pucks in the net reminds me of Nikita Kucherov. The speed at which he processes plays in the offensive zone is kind of like Kucherov. But I think he's faster, and he's got a more dynamic element to his game than Kucherov. He's going to blaze his own path. He is going to thrill Flyers fans every time he gets the puck in the offensive zone. I mean, he's so quick. He's like a leopard, basically.
And the teams finally are going to have a player they're going to have to game plan for. And this hasn't really been something that the Flyers had for the longest time. And it killed their power play. I mean, since the heyday when Joey Mullen was the coach and they fired him and they thought they had a new thing coming in, it was going to be so much better. And it never really was the same. They've had some average years, but basically their power play sucked. It was all around Giroux. They didn't have any shooters. Now they have some shooters, but they don't really have a lot in the way of dynamic talent outside of Frost and Konechny, and they're not top level. This guy changes and makes everybody else around him better for that reason. They're going to find the puck on their sticks when they don't even expect it. But, and you can throw a lot of the other players like Forster and Gauthier into the bargain too. We don't even know what that's going to look like. It's going to be better than what we see now, Chef. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's going, who's he going to play with now? He's going to play with, it's going to be great, Oh, awesome. So, but yeah, I am so looking forward to it because to what Dan said too is he's not just a shooter. He's a little bit of everything. So if you're playing him to shoot, he can put a pass on somebody else's stick, and now you got a couple other guys on the team that can maybe finish it after the playmaker. And you're not just playing one guy now. You're playing like several. He's going to see. I always said this about great players. He's going to be a great player, but great players make other players around him better too. And that's what he's going to do. Everybody that plays on that line with him is going to get better. And they're going to be doing things they never thought of before, to what Dan said about Michkov. So I think that it just elevated everybody's abilities or what they can achieve. It's like a cheat code almost on a game. You can put them on a line. All of a sudden, everybody's hockey's IQ is going to go up too. I mean, you can't help it with somebody that is that good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's he's a catalyst. Number one. Number two, he creates synergy, makes everybody else better. There's no doubt about it. So for now, that's enough for about Matvei Michkov. We're going to learn a lot more coming into the season. But Dan, later the Flyers had another pick at 22, and they decided to go what I felt with a little bit more of a conservative, high floor defenseman, Oliver Bonk. That name sounds familiar. His father, Radek, had a 900 game NHL career, I believe it was, mostly with Ottawa. You had a lot of talent left on the board at that point. What was your feeling about drafting Oliver Bonk after the Michkov gambit?
It almost felt like the rest of the draft was sort of playing with house money for the Flyers after you take a guy like Michkov, because he just by himself, he just changes the trajectory of the franchise and signals a new era of Flyers hockey, right? But there were some really good players available at 22 in terms of talent and skill wise. Gabriel Perreault is probably the main guy that comes to mind for me. Scott Wheeler from The Athletic had him ranked 7th on his list. He was part of that incredible line with Will Smith and Ryan Leonard. He actually scored more points than either of those guys. Little bit of a smaller guy. It's going to take some time. But to me, Perreault is a player who he would have just been another highly skilled guy to add to the mix. It's clear, though, the Flyers didn't have a second-round pick. It's clear that they really wanted to add a defenseman, and specifically one on the right side, that they thought could kind of help backfill. It was a pick based off need, in my opinion, instead of best player available. And there is kind of a drop-off that happened with defensemen, I would say, after the late first round, early second round. And so they took Oliver Bonk, who, by the way, we heard Keith Jones talk about how important it is in his mind to build from the blue line out. So I think that sort of had something to do with it also. Oliver Bonk is a guy that really came along towards the end of this season. He's a very good defenseman. He also has some offensive talent, but he's a really good shutdown defenseman. His father, Radek Bonk, was a terrific two-way NHLer who was like extremely responsible defensively, his father. And I think that's sort of, his father was a forward. His son, Oliver, is a defenseman, but I think that kind of shows itself in Oliver's play. I think there's some untapped offensive upside, but he's got a very high floor. He's probably going to be no worse than a number 5 defenseman. And, you know, his upside's probably a number 3 or a number 4. So hopefully he becomes a shutdown right-hand defense, the second guy on the right for the Flyers, who can, you know, won't be a power play guy, but he'll just be a really solid shutdown defenseman. He's got some size. So I think that was a safe pick for them there. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think they really wanted to get a defenseman in that spot.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Then the Flyers pulled a little bit of a surprise by trading and getting a second-round pick. Okay, not a surprise there. I think they traded their second-round pick from 24, knowing that they had a compensatory pick coming to them for not signing Jay O'Brien. And I think pick number 167 this year. I believe that was the deal. And they take a goaltender. And I hope I don't mess up his name. Is Carson Bjarnason, who from the WHL?
Yeah.
And it was ratings for him are all over the place. But then they go and they take, in the third round, they take another goalie, a Russian goalie that a lot of people didn't know much about. He had a .920 save percentage in the MHL, kind of like the CHL of the, you know, Russian in Russia, if I have that correct.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of, so while the second round was going on, I'm waiting for the Flyers to try and trade up into the second round. I had a feeling that they were going to try and get a second round pick. There were some good forwards still left on the board as we were going down it. Grayson Sawchin's a guy that was really interesting to me, really high upside skilled forward. So they traded when they trade up and they announced this goalie who by a lot of the lists that I look at was rated in the 90s. And I'm like, what are they doing here? But in retrospect, they had a couple goalies that they really liked. He was one of them. And he was actually the highest rated goalie in North America by Central Scouting, Carson Bjarnason, playing at Brandon. 6'3", good size, really good down low, but apparently he was kind of exposed up high at the U18s, I think. And that
it was like an 8-0 game.
Against Sweden, that gave people some pause. But apparently he was a little rusty heading into that. He hadn't played in a while. The Flyers clearly believe in his upside, and then they take the Russian goalie with their first pick in the third round. Here's the thing. I saw some people on Twitter being like, oh, this means Carter Hart's definitely being moved. I think Hart, there's a decent possibility he's moved. I don't think there's any correlation here. If you look at the Flyers goalie system, they've got some good young goalies in Erson and Alexei Kolosov, but those guys are close to the NHL. The Flyers really needed to restock their goalie prospects from guys who are ages 18 and 19. And so I think it's important that they added a few goalies. You can never have enough goalie prospects, and they had so many picks in this year's draft that I think that was part of it, and that's what Briere said after the draft in his interview. He said that they were really concerned that some goalies started going in the early second round, that they were going to miss out on one of the goalies they liked. So that's why they traded in the second round. They wanted to kind of replenish the goalie stockpile, and then they liked the kid from Russia also. So they took those guys. But then they had a couple really nice. They took 3 straight forwards after that, and interesting guys. They took a kid named Denver Barkey from London, the same team as Oliver Bonk, who really reminds me of kind of like a Danny Briere light type of player. He's 5'9", 160, so he's kind of slight, but apparently he's just a battler, and he was really good in the playoffs for London. They made a deep playoff push. He really stepped up his game in the playoffs. He seems like a Danny Briere type of player, and the type of pick he would like. I really liked his interview, his post-draft interview. If fans can go on YouTube onto the Flyers page, watch Denver Barkey's interview. I thought he was really well-spoken. He just seemed like a kid who's got a good mind and who could turn into a pretty good player. And then they took Mike Knubel's son in the 4th round, Cole Knubel. He's got some skating issues, but he was, I think, the USHL Player of the Year, actually. He's got a lot of talent.
He's an overager, right? He was eligible for last year, but
he is an overager. But it was interesting because Briere, I think, was talking how when he was with the Flyers, Cole Knubel was a young kid running around the Flyers locker room. So he kind of remembered him from then. And then they took a Czech forward playing over in Sweden, Alex Chirnik, who, again, is very skilled, a little bit smaller. But so they took 3 forwards under 6 foot tall who have got a lot of skill. And I think with Briere, you're going to see that as kind of a pattern. Yeah,
and just let's not forget Denver Barkey. What are those initials? DB, Danny Briere. So, I mean, it might be Chef, any comments about some of these other picks, or we just got to kind of wait till we have our big special? We're going to have this Monday, Steve Cornianos. He's really going to break down a lot of these kids.
Yeah.
Coming up. So, yeah.
More so than anything, I think, Danny, Dan pretty much summed it up on like, pretty much. I mean, he knows the draft. I've looked up a couple. I don't know the Russian goalie. I know a little bit about the Carson, the goalie, but other than that, not really. I mean, it's going to be a wait and see thing. But I will say this: it seemed like I heard, like, London, the London Knights, right?
Yeah.
It seemed like they had a lot of players go. So in this draft, it was up there, and kudos to the USHL again, Development League. I mean, they're year after year, they've come through the last 3 or 4 years. They're really producing some really good talent coming out of there. So that's nice to see that. So, and of course, Boston College next year is going to be a beast. So it'll be fun to watch that. So.
Yeah, London's known. That's a Hunter Brothers. They have their own little system there. Their development is really something.
Yeah.
But they were a little controversial still, I think, though. But for what it's worth, Corey Pronman in an early grade, when I don't know how you can grade a draft right after it happened, gave the Flyers an A. He likes the promise of it, is what I'm taking from that. He likes, obviously, Michkov. He's a big believer in him, and it feels that the draft will come down basically to whether that player works out. And I can agree with that. But Bonk should play, and he likes the goaltender, and then the rest of it is a crapshoot, like the goal, like the draft usually is. So, gents, just before we wrap, I just wanted to hit some of the opinions that you guys have. Chef, let me start with you. Kevin Hayes. We didn't have a chance to comment on the trade that would have been with St. Louis involving Travis Sanheim, who apparently, according to TFP's Anthony DeMarco, is not going to be traded anytime real soon. He was part of a trade for St. Louis that would have netted the Flyers another first-round draft pick. Kevin Hayes was part of that, and Torrey Krug was supposed to be coming back along with that first-round draft pick. Apparently there was also less retention for the Flyers because Sanheim was included, and Torrey Krug would be off the books. The Blues have an old defense, but it didn't work out because Torrey Krug said, "No, I don't want to go to Philadelphia. I don't want to block shots at age 32 and go through a rebuild, I guess." And
Yeah.
so it was a sixth round pick, and the Flyers retained 50% on Kevin Hayes, who had virtually no value. And the Flyers had no leverage. And that's what it was. What do you think?
Yeah, a lot of people were upset about that, like that Danny didn't get nothing and he'd slip back on a trade. But I think what most people don't realize, that wasn't what was, that wasn't the expensive, that wasn't the value of the trade. The value of the trade was, Krug. It was getting him, and that's where they were taking his salary, and that's where they were getting for the number one pick. And they were able to swap out Sanheim in there too. So the value wasn't coming from our side. The value was coming from the fact that we were willing to retain, Krug. So, and maybe you could flip him to somewhere else or not. But I think that's where like some of the fans were upset about it not getting done. And with Sanheim, I know we want to get his contract down there. I know, and I had said stuff to both of you guys privately off of this, and I figured it was going to be a more wait and see thing. I didn't think they were that urgent. I was more worried that they were going to come across as desperate, and then after they couldn't move them. So for now, I'm okay. And I think we were talking before the show, and I agree with Dan too. And I'm sure he'll comment on it, but. I think Sanheim will be dealt. It's just going to take a little bit of time, and it's not going to be right away.
Yeah, well, and part of this whole milieu was Frank Cervalli and Andy Strickland, for that matter. And by the way, Andy Strickland has a direct line into Philadelphia and has for years, and occasionally has scooped Philadelphia reporters for in terms of where the information was coming from. But it was like there was going to be a fire sale on Sanheim. Lawton, TK was out there. Carter Hart would have been, but with the investigation, with the what happened in 2018, they weren't so sure. But they made it sound was that the Flyers are going to undergo a broad embrace of a rebuild and make tons of changes, and it never materialized. And from what I understand, a lot of it was BS. And you have to wonder who was feeding them that information, or were some of these pundits that we trust so much making stuff up?
Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of involved. Things are such a blur. This was last weekend. But what's funny is, so on Saturday, it was on Saturday. I have a buddy who sent me a DM. I used to work in St. Louis and minor league hockey, so I've still got some connections to hockey in St. Louis. I had a buddy who DM'd me 1:30 on Saturday afternoon, I think it was, saying, "Hey, I'm hearing some things about a Flyers Blues trade involving Kevin Hayes." This was before anything was online. I immediately looked on Twitter and I was like, I don't see anything. And he's like, no, he's like, this sounds legit to me that something's going on. And I was like, I almost, because I'm not a breaking news guy. Like, it's just not my thing. I'm not a paid reporter, but I have some connections in hockey. So sometimes I will send stuff out. I thought about it, saying that something sounds like something's going on between the Blues and the Flyers and Hayes, and I didn't do it. And 2 minutes later, Andy Strickland sent his tweet out, which started the whole thing. So I had gotten intel that this was going on. And then throughout the course of the day, my source was kind of keeping me in touch with what was going on. And that's how it was all from the Blues side. Like, it was for me, it's only because I have this in with the Blues, but that's how I think I was the first person that tweeted out that Torrey Krug was the holdup on the trade. And it's because I was getting this information from the Blues side of things. It was, no one from the Flyers was telling me anything. And so it's all kind of really interesting. Then everything fell apart because Krug wouldn't waive his no trade clause. I think that, right, there was me. I had not heard. I had actually been told that no draft picks were involved. And then later on, people were saying that there was a draft pick, a first round pick was going to be involved. But if there was a first involved, as Chef said, it was because we were going to be taking Krug's salary back and giving him Sanheim. It obviously had nothing to do with Hayes. And then I forget who had tweeted out that, Lawton could be involved and Konechny could be involved and all these various, and D'Angelo could be involved. I mean, it was like blew up. And then it turned into a whimper with us moving Hayes. I think a lot of this is being driven by Torts behind the scenes. You see the guys that he doesn't want on this team. I don't think he wants D'Angelo back. I don't think, and it sounds like that trade to the Hurricanes is going to happen in July.
Because of
Hayes,
this rule about
Separate rule.
yeah, I mean, we can get into that, but he clearly doesn't want Hayes on this team. So they got rid of Hayes. They didn't get anything back. Sanheim doesn't seem to me like he's a Torts kind of player. The Flyers, it sounded to me like the Flyers were desperately trying to move Travis Sanheim during the draft for a first round pick or a second round pick. And then they just kind of gave up, I think, and figured maybe we can get more value next week. There's this July 1st no trade clause that kicks in for Sanheim. I'm not sure how much that matters. I mean, look, Tortorella benched the guy in front of his family in Calgary. Now Sanheim knows that they are trying to get rid of him. You really think he wants to stay here? Like, I think that Sanheim will probably waive his no trade clause to go to a location that has interest in him. Is my I don't think he's going to be here when the season starts. I could be wrong, but it might take a little bit of time.
Yeah. And what was the deal with Carolina is going to take back Tony DeAngelo? The Flyers are going to retain half the salary for the remaining 1 year he has. Mm-hmm. And the Flyers are going to get back what?
A prospect. It's a salary dump. I read that it was just going to be one of Carolina's worst prospects. I mean, Again, it's a player that I don't think John Tortorella wants on this roster. He only has 1 year left on his contract. Carolina, who got a second, third, and fourth round pick from us for DeAngelo last year, is now going to basically get him back for free for half of what we're paying him for the final year. And yeah, as you mentioned, Isaiah, there's some weird rule that you can't get traded back to a team that traded you within a year. So they've got to wait until July 8th. But it sure sounds like,
it's because they're retaining the salary portion of it.
Sure,
you could probably go back out without retaining salary. It's a way to circumvent a cap, and that's why they don't want teams doing it. But their argument was it was a different GM that made that deal, and it's just.
And the Flyers signed him to a contract. Carolina never signed him to a contract. So I mean,
it's one of those rules things. But it sounds like by July 8th that they'll be able to complete that trade.
My concern is if Carolina finds something that's a little bit better. It's not likely it'll probably go through, but it's a rule that hurts the Flyers. And by the way, the Flyers are not going to get back a second, a third, and a fourth for Tony DeAngelo. So we have a show coming up on Monday with Steve Cornianos, also known as the draft analyst, on Substack and on Twitter at the draft analyst. He was with us before the draft. He's going to analyze and get into the minutia. He has a draft guide that you can still purchase at Substack, and I would check it out. It's good stuff. So we're looking forward to that. And plus, there's free agency. So I don't think the Flyers are going to do much. I do think they're going to possibly get some Band-Aids. I still think the trade market's going to be active, though, because teams don't have a lot of leeway, and the teams that have some cap space might be able to get some assets, draft picks for 24, which is probably the best bet for if Travis Sanheim is going to get picked up. It's going to be a 24 asset probably.
Yeah, the free agent market is not that strong this season. So I think what Briere is banking on is like these teams are going to see, hey, there's not really many defensemen out here that we really want. Maybe we should trade for Travis Sanheim, maybe the same thing with, I don't know if eventually if they end up trading Lawton and or Hart and or Konechny, but some of those moves might happen during the season if they're going to happen. But right now, the Flyers have 2 first and 2 second-round picks next year. I guarantee you that they'll end up with more than that in terms of first-round picks, because it's hard for me to believe that with this rebuild we've got that they're not going to move one of Lawton or Hart or Konechny. I don't think Sanheim's going to bring a first-round pick, but we'll see.
No, not at this point now. So, gents, we're going to leave it there. We're going to be back on Monday, like I mentioned earlier. Let's get some final thoughts. Chef, what have you to say?
I say this. I say enjoy the moment. Enjoy the fact that you got like a genuine superstar in the pipeline, and just live in the moment. And just know that it just makes all the food and drink tastes better watching this team grow over the next couple of years, knowing that he's coming. It's not quite as bitter as it was before. So,
You got
and you can argue with me about any of that on Twitter at Chef to the left B. That's Chef the number 2, the left B.
You got it, Dan.
I mean, look, they are the Flyers. They're not going to be very good this coming season, which it's going to make watching bad hockey games a lot more palatable, knowing that Michkov is coming in 3 years. It gives this front office something to plan towards. Briere can now say, look, I need to do everything I'm doing. I want to be competitive and put a decent product out there, but I want to make sure that when Michkov comes over, we are ready to compete, hopefully for a Stanley Cup. They are Cutter Gauthier. This doesn't really matter all that much, but it's, as a prospect guy like me, it's kind of cool. You know, Gauthier is not going to be in the league next year. Maybe at the end of the season, if Boston College doesn't make the Frozen Four or something, he'll play some games in the NHL. But they're going to have their prospect pool is going to include next offseason Gauthier, Michkov, and whoever they pick in the draft next year. They'll probably have a top 5 pick. They're going to clearly have the best prospect pool in the league, just by virtue of those 3 guys. And it's exciting. I mean, they're really it's going to give people something to build towards. So I think just the fact that they have Michkov and can look forward to that is going to make things a lot of fun. And it was so much, like I said earlier, it was just so much fun watching how excited he was. It just made it feel more real, right? Because there was so much mystery behind him. Now the mystery's gone. Like, we know who he is. We know that he loves Philly. It's exciting. So I'm pumped.
Fantastic. And yeah, I agree. It is a new era of Flyers hockey. It's going to be bumpy along the road because there are a lot of mistakes, and there's still a lot to clean up from Chuck Fletcher, and still a little bit from Ron Hextall for that matter. But it is time to get excited. The Flyers really have a genuine talent that's going to be at the top of the league in terms of just pure talent and bringing offense. It's going to be exciting. You're going to put your TV on, even if they struggle out of the gate when he finally joins them. You can watch him. The Flyers haven't been able to say that for a long time. So you can follow me at Isaiah, ISAIAH _520 Isaiah. Don't forget the _520. And again, the OMB Podcast on Twitter at OMB Puck, at OMB Puck. Really appreciate that. So until next time, Monday night with Steve Cornianos, the draft analyst. Take care, everybody.